Welcome to our next segment of Seniorities. I am J.D. Miller. I'm Chairman of the Board of the Scituate Council on Aging. I'm here, as always, with our Executive Director, Linda Hayes. We plan today to kind of review where we are, where we're going, where we are now, and how we've gotten here in terms of this meeting. We're just beyond town meeting earlier in the week, and we have now moved forward with a funding approval process for some things that we're going to talk to you about in terms of architectural hire and construction bid estimates for a new senior center building. But before we go too deep in terms of where we're going and how we've gotten there, I'm going to maybe pass it over to you here for a second.
Sure, okay. Well,
or for a good half hour.
No, thanks for tuning in. It was a process, so we are post-town meeting, and I guess we do want to talk a little bit, as JD said, about how we got here. There was certainly an element that may have attended that still hadn't heard about the different steps we've taken to get to this point, which really has covered. I have been with the Senior Center Council on Aging here in Scituate for a little over 4 years, and the entire time has been moving toward this point, which is very exciting. So I might take a moment too to just mention that everyone, beginning with the selectmen, our former town administrator, our new town administrator, our acting town administrator, briefly. We had a building reuse committee we'll talk a little bit about, and others before them, as well as our own COA board. They just did an admirable job all the way through of turning indecision into a decision. That was hard to come by, but I think weighed all of the options and made great efforts to solicit community input while also considering all the other interests put before them. So, it wasn't an easy journey to get here, but I think we're all happy about that. In 2014, in the summer, in fact, and you were with me then, we formed a committee. Well, actually, I guess I should go back to the town meeting in 2014. Funds were at that time allocated for a needs assessment study, and then that work we got to very quickly. So that beginning that summer and into that fall, there was a study done by UMass Amherst Gerontology Institute, very well thought of in doing that really all over the state at this point. But we were one of the first. And
these are needs for the Scituate senior community.
It was.
A needs assessment looking at where this senior center and who it was servicing at the moment and in the future. Right?
How it was perceived,
right.
Where it needed to go, what people thought it should be or do,
right.
and what they thought they should be provided or wanted to be provided by the town of Scituate also. So it's been on our website ever since. It was published, the report was published in the beginning of 2015. It was presented both to the Board of Selectmen, of course, and then to the public in March of 2015. So things were cited. We've certainly referenced it throughout the course of the years and tried to follow some of the early recommendations from them in terms of our programming and communication and planning. So we have tried to do that, and one of the biggest recommendations, of course, coming out of that was to develop a more viable, vibrant resource for seniors in the community. That was what was preventing many of them from taking advantage of the services and programs that were currently offered, and we continue to do and make.
Needed spatial and physical needs. I mean, there was needed more room to do more, all these things that you were doing or planning to doing. You needed more room.
And granted, it was a paper survey, mailed paper survey, and it was a random selection of recipients, which UMass does based on an algorithm, but the different age cohorts that they targeted at that time were 45 to 59, I believe, and older, but there were percentages of those ages targeted. So it was scientifically sought, the information, but certainly still a small sampling of Scituate. But even still, I think we had a 30% response, and I believe 2,000 surveys were mailed at
Yeah.
that time. If
And this
I
is,
remember
this was all conducted by UMass
So-
Gerontology program,
Right.
or
Yep.
department.
Yeah.
They advised us on questions to ask. We
Yes.
tweaked those questions or added some questions.
did. There was a
They advised
committee.
us, right, on what information we needed to find, but they took care, so it was,
Yeah.
they were doing it.
They were doing it.
They did it.
It was super, and the report was great, and it is still available on the Town of Scituate website, the Council on Aging page, if anyone is interested. So that was 2014.
Yep.
2015, following that report, during that summer, the building reuse, the Scituate Adaptive Building Reuse Committee was established, charged with reviewing what were to be the vacated buildings in town, and what to do with those buildings, and how to consider what had also been established, the master plan, I believe, at that point, that the town had provided for them. But that was a year-long committee that looked at the buildings, talked a lot about the
Put a
senior
lot
center and
of,
senior
lot
center
of time
needs.
in, a lot of people put a lot of time into
Yes,
that committee.
yeah. Weekly or bi-weekly
Yeah.
meetings for a year.
For a year plus, I think.
That resulted in another report, another presentation, but again, in much effort, because at that time, the presentation was made to the Board of Selectmen with their results. They had engaged an architectural firm at that time to illustrate the proposal they might have made for either using and rehabbing Gates, the old Gates School, the soon-to-be vacated Gates School at that time, into town offices, a town hall, a town campus, so to speak, with a senior center built behind it, versus their second recommendation was, if that wasn't to be the case, then to remove the Gates School and then use that land for community town resources, whether it was fields, athletic fields, or another purpose. It wasn't conducive to a senior center, and was determined by that committee to be the case. We would have attested to that as well, and did, but it was determined that that was not a viable building for a senior center. But the Board of Selectmen's.
And we've all gone through
Right,
this
right.
endlessly, but
Right.
reasons,
For many reasons.
reasons being, it was a Lego block building that was added onto numerous times over 100+ years. It was built and used as a school, not as anything else.
Right, an adult center. Yeah.
I think someone said it had literally 16
level
different
changes.
level changes, including a pretty steep entrance that you can see from the street. And its infrastructure, or its internal bones, if you will, were failing. The heating system, et cetera, were just not
Right.
working very well.
Right.
So, to rehab that building
Right.
was biting off a significant project.
But believe me, in this presentation, it was, the thought of it as town hall, town offices, certainly lended itself to being a great proposal, except
Yep.
that it was would be an extremely expensive proposition. And, rightly, the Board of Selectmen at that time, which has continued, so even 2 years later, the appetite for that kind of expense in town after the other 3 buildings, and then some, and
Sure.
and all the other work being done in town, just wouldn't fly. And that was their response at that time. Was that just
Right, so now
couldn't be
we're
done.
going back to the override that the town's citizens approved to fund the fire and safety building, some money for the library, and a new middle school, which now subsequently is over adjacent to the high school and has created a school campus, a community campus over off of First Parish and 3A.
Beautiful school.
Yeah.
It's great. So, that brings us to 2017, how quickly the years go by. 2017, the beginning of 2017, was when the feasibility study was begun. So
Now,
that
feasibility study,
for,
this was, the Board of Selectmen decided to look at X number of parcels of land in town, locations in town.
yes,
as a possible landing spot for a new building.
In which we have talked about several times
Right.
on this program, just to try and keep people updated. But again, following the response by the selectmen to the Building Reuse Committee's proposals, it was that the senior center was a priority. We needed to pull that out, see how we could get that done before moving on to yet more projects
Yep.
within the town. But that this had become and was always intended to be their next priority, which was very nice. So the feasibility study was put forth in order to study for potentially feasible sites for placing a new senior center and how they would apply to that. Which we did so 2017. That took us to the presentation in June of 2017 by the firm that had taken on, was hired and taken on the feasibility study of the 4 sites. They presented to the Board of Selectmen in June of 2017, beginning. It was the first one. Then in July, we had a couple of public forums to re-present and offer opportunity for some discussion and questions with the architect himself on their findings, which they presented pros and cons, disadvantages and advantages to each site without actually coming out and saying this is our recommended site,
Correct,
which they
right.
themselves did not say.
Right, they weren't asked to provide that, they weren't funded to provide that. They were paid to kind of do a model overlay on sites to see some of the pros and cons, as you said.
Yep. So that brings us to, August, September, certainly the Council on Aging Board of Directors, board members, we have 9 board members, and I am they're advisory to the director. I do not vote on the board.
You're not a voted member, but you're, right, correct.
Right. So the board was asked to consider the information received by the feasibility study and potentially make a recommendation or at least provide input regarding their thoughts to the Board of Selectmen as to, given the programming they know we want to be able to do, intend to do, hope to do, some of our other requirements, our numbers, and what not, what might have been their recommendation. And I think it's safe to say here, because it was discussed and people do realize that they did come to recommend the Driftway site, which was one of the 4. And I think primarily, probably there were a good few reasons for that, but correct me if I'm wrong. But
the reasons were real simple. We thought that some people thought it was the quickest way to get going.
True.
Period.
That's,
It was a relatively clean piece of
Yes.
land and
Yeah.
with nothing that needed
Yeah.
to be moved to
right.
get started,
I was gonna, yeah,
theoretically.
unencumbered was what I
Right.
was going to say, by
Unencumbered.
different interests and/or, well, we thought the different interests, but at least no other things going on at the time or infringements. Also, it was estimated at that time to be, because of that, maybe a little less money, but of course it was just an estimate. And that it offered the opportunity, as we looked at it, because there were no other encumbrances, other than the fact that it wasn't actually owned by the town
Right,
yet,
right.
which could be significant
Right.
and really wasn't our charge to consider. And probably we didn't even know all there was involved in that. But just the idea that it offered opportunity for expansion if, in fact, the beginning building was of the square footage, not the largest square footage that we might want, but could build out. So it was merely a recommendation, and the Board of Selectmen had many other things to consider and had been considering. That being the case, and also the Driftway property being a little bit questionable in terms
Yes.
of how quickly we could have it, if we could have it at
Correct.
all, and if that would work out for us, and how soon. So
Correct. So there were obstacles that we subsequently learned.
and they chose the gate site.
Mhm.
We considered the gate site. We walked the gate site. We liked the gate site, if not for the fact that what would happen with that building and where would they fit us around that building that would be conducive to what we needed and the abutters and the other interests who wanted to remain on that site as well. So, there were questions.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not wanting to delay the senior center project any more than it would take. Those were our questions when we didn't necessarily say this is where we want to be. But what did we want in a site? We wanted a somewhat central location ideally.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
If the space was there. We wanted some visibility if we could get it. The idea that it wasn't so remote or off the beaten path that nobody knew it was there.
Right. We didn't want to be tucked away in the woods someplace. Yep.
Ability to have signage for people to see, when the parking lot was full and what we were doing at different times, and signage where they would be aware of events that we might be having. Ample space for the building size that we'd like, outdoor space and attributes that we would be able to take advantage of as well as the community. Plenty of safe parking, access to the building, walkability, ample parking, as I said, without it being used maybe by other entities at the same
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So, knowing it was somewhat dedicated. So those were the primary things we were looking for in a building.
That campus, that location checked a lot of boxes, not only for the Council on Aging and the senior community, but for the Board of Selectmen. It enabled some synergies around a ball field, a track, some tennis courts for outdoor activities, some historic sites such as Cudworth House, Historical Society, right across the street, Lawson Tower, a little bit farther away, the library, right next to the library, senior housing. So right in the center of town, in a space that had already had development on it, and by that I distinguish that because it was not a virgin piece of land. We were looking at something that we were going to change, but it had already been developed. And so for all or many of those reasons, that location came up and checked, as I said, more boxes than almost everybody else. And so we started to look more and more at that.
Right. But for the fact with the building.
Right.
And the other disadvantage that was named in the study had been the traffic around that location, and that could be a concern, but I think it was established even when the Building Reuse Committee looked at that and the other architects had made their proposal, that it would be worked in to the site design.
Sure.
Ultimately, and improved upon, which will be great for the whole community, regardless of the senior center being
traffic
there
flow,
the
traffic congestion, bad sight lines, we want to improve all that. So we were initially charged with looking at that location, those acres, that acreage, and trying to envision putting a new building down someplace. And we weren't really given the opportunity to look at that acreage as a blank slate.
Right, we were not. Nor was the firm doing the feasibility study.
Correct,
So
correct.
They offered a couple of options that were, one was not ideal, one could work, but that would have involved relocating another resource that would have needed
Right.
the soccer field, namely. So
we've sort of we actually sort of evolved
Yep.
to where we are now by combining, if you will, years of work on an adaptive reuse recommendation that was basically, that one of its recommendations was basically to take down a building, with the vision to look at that space and say, well, if it's sort of tight to put a new building in any place here on this campus and leave the current unoccupied building standing, and knowing that the other position from the Building Reuse Committee was that to rehab that building was going to be extraordinarily expensive, and this is a taxpayer expense, and the numbers we've tossed around, I think, pretty legitimately are probably $30 million plus. we evolved through the work with the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator Jim Boudreau to putting all the pieces together and saying, well, what if we take that building down? What if we take that building down and put a new building up in its place? There'll be plenty of land left over. It takes away a building that we can't figure out how to use and/or is too expensive to reuse. It should free up a lot of land because, as someone mentioned the other day, more recently, bringing us up to date, there's 80,000 square feet of real estate in that building. We're talking about a 15,000 square foot senior center. So there's a lot of land, access, perhaps expansion ability, but room to readdress traffic flow, parking, et cetera, by plopping a 15,000 square foot building down sort of on top of what is there now.
Very nice, and I think, funny enough, it really gave us the campus idea and the expansion opportunities, or at least the opportunities for the assets and attributes we were hoping for when we looked at the other sites. And here we are. So I think
so the process has been a long time.
It has, and we didn't even mention the survey that was done.
Right.
And many of those respondents wondered if the school area could be used, and liked the idea as well. It not doing anything else
right.
at the time.
Right. So Jim Boudreau brought some of the dots together in conjunction with the Board of Selectmen and their recommendations, and they combined their heads together and said, well, wait a minute, why don't we think about this idea? We were always trying to fit a half of a peg into a half of a hole. We were trying to figure out how to put a building on a lot and keep another building. Well, now if we knock that building down and put another building up, we can get a peg right into the hole. So that's sort of, again, we've talked about this offline. The vetting process, if you will, or the evolution of this idea, concept, plan has been years.
Very thorough.
It's been years. It's involved surveys, senior surveys, public forums, Board of Selectmen, Council on Aging. I mean, it's involved a lot of the community, as much of the community as we could get involved and informed. Adaptive Planning Reuse Committee, and I come back, those people put in a lot of time and put a lot of effort into trying to figure out the best ways to do things. So it has evolved and been vetted pretty well if you look at it from that perspective, because it's been an ongoing process for 4+ years.
Yep. Ongoing, consistent progress.
Right. So that got us to this past week. Well, earlier this past week, where we went to town meeting on night number 1 with the proposal to really where we are right now is
Purchase of services.
right. We're trying to the town has hired an owner's project manager who is basically acts as an employee of the town, brings with him expertise and experience in construction building process. That is a legal requirement of the town if we're doing anything that involves anything above and beyond $1.5 million, conceivably. So we have an owner's project manager who can advise, because you don't have the expertise, I don't have the expertise, the Board of Selectmen don't have the expertise, the town administrator doesn't have the expertise to be the general contractor on this kind of a job. So we've hired an owner's project manager. Now we've gone to town meeting and been approved, working with the owner's project manager to now hire an architect who will help us define not only the spatial needs based on studies, based on programming needs, based on population needs, but also how to put a new building on this site, including knocking down what we've got. Also being conscious of heritage, being conscious of image, being conscious of
absolutely.
visuals.
Yep.
We want this, so we have now been approved to hire an architect who will then also take us through the hiring of, or the soliciting of solid construction bids, so we'll actually know what the costs are for this project. We're not chasing a concept and then trying to figure out what it's gonna cost. We're gonna build a concept and then get hard numbers to tell us exactly what this construction process is gonna cost. So that's what was approved at
Right.
town meeting earlier this week.
Which gives us a more concrete, obviously concrete, no pun intended, design
Right.
to bring to the town, which obviously does still need to be approved and voted for by the residents of the town. So we need to be very careful and make sure that it's something that we have taken great care in presenting, that the town will be proud of, will be able to see how useful it will be. It is necessary. The senior population we could talk about as projected to be upwards to 6,000 easily by 2025.
The population of the senior community in the town of Scituate will be at least 30 to 35% of our population in a matter of years, probably in 5.
Right, and for the next 20 years.
Right. So that's a lot of folks that we're not, to a degree, we're not taking care of us the way we
We are
should.
not taking care of them now, we are not. We are trying, but we are not.
Right.
We are not able to, so.
So some of the factors that, so I'm going to come back because we talked about this a little bit. Some of the comments / objections that may have been raised at town meeting. One was, and that's a perfect segue to where we just talked, that this is a building only for one group of people in town. That's not the case. This is
Well, the group being primarily adults, 60 and up. You could go down to 55. We could talk about the number of volunteers who are younger than 60 who
Right.
come in, or would, and certainly those numbers would increase greatly. It really is a multi-generational
exactly.
population inherently already, as we think about the 4 decades of age groups that we actually serve, that would attend, that would take part in different things, but also take part in many things together. So, yes, one group, it's a pretty big group.
Right. Well, right. And it's not an exclusive group.
It is not an exclusive group, would not be. I mean, we begin with the programming, of course, because that's the draw. It takes time to create trust, and it really takes activity to create interest and to bring people in the door. The the program manager of the Executive Office of Elder Affairs,
Emmett?
Emmett.
Okay.
I mean, he said a great many things, of course, but one of them was, first of all, you certainly have to be flexible. He says, you do have to be flexible. But people start, according to the numbers that they receive by the state from all of the COAs in Massachusetts, many participants begin doing exercise fitness, and that is really probably where our biggest numbers are often. And we do a wide range of exercise, from very low impact, yogas, tai chis, all the way up to dance, and we'd like to be able to do strength training. We certainly have recreation. But they start that way, and then they become volunteers, and then they become active in the center, having started that way. We have observed here in Scituate that often they begin as volunteers, and they see what's going on already, and again, our numbers are much less, our space is so much smaller, our activities and programs are separated, not collected under one roof, so that oftentimes we miss things. But where we do have volunteers, and when they do see what's happening, they start participating. And honestly, that's been a consistent trend. It's wonderful. Whether they are of the junior, senior, younger age cohort, or even younger than that, or part of the demographic we expect to serve, but just wanted to get their feet wet a little differently just by volunteering, because many of them are active. And even with other interests, the connection at the senior center is important. We hear stories about things that happen in classes that we don't get to see, because as a staff, let's say, or even the other seniors who, if they were to see what was happening, may also want to take part in those things. But we get the stories, we know the stories are there, we just don't get to see and connect with much of what's going on when classes are held at different buildings, which currently they are. So that is, that's an unfortunate byproduct of what we are doing now, which is running all over town.
Scattered all over town. All over town.
And we do it because it's how we can maintain a level of programming that we at least think, is being appreciated by, as I may have said before, but we serve close to 1,200 individual seniors, older adults, even as is,
Right.
of our 5,000 senior population over 60.
And that, as
Which
we've
is
also
still a
talked
quarter.
offline, that's right, exactly, that's still a quarter of the quote-unquote senior population, and that also represents a growth year over year from who was using it 3 years ago.
It has been a steady increase simply because we've just continued to add programming almost with blinders on.
Right.
We'll figure out how to do it, we'll find space for it, which we do, many other buildings in town. They've been good to us in terms of allowing us to use their space, or whether we're sharing the community building with the rec department, using St. Mary's, using the new library at this point. Other space in town is often found if it's needed, so it works.
But it's a scramble.
And it does limit the opportunities, the connectivity that we're looking for, that we know the seniors would benefit from. And again, it's a broad term when we use the term seniors here. Just making those connections. But, and it's been said many times, especially through this process, they appreciate, those that do participate really do appreciate what they have found to be the benefits of what we're able to offer, what we do offer. But there's just so much more that I know and have seen we can do. Emmett also told the story about his having been at the town meeting in Duxbury back in 1999, 2000, when they were voting on the building that they then built and opened in 2001. And it was a 12,000 square foot building that they were proposing, but there was certainly criticism of the size at that time, and he said, "You're going to need more. Trust me, you are going to need more space, and you should build it bigger," at that time. They didn't. They built it at 12,000 square feet, and now,
And we've seen recent
17
examples.
years later,
Right.
17 years, and it's a great senior center, they have just voted for a 4,000 square foot addition, which makes it now a 16,000 square foot senior center.
Right.
And for good reason, because their programming really defined their need for that space. The population that they're serving is diverse, and it was necessary.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they did have strong community support for that, and that's wonderful.
And we know
But-
some of our surrounding neighbors, whether it's Marshfield is looking to expand, Hingham is looking to expand, because they don't have enough space. And Duxbury has funded the expansion,
Right.
but our other neighbors are trying to figure out how to get more space, because they've got a population like we do that's sort of bursting at the seams and wants more services.
Yeah.
So where we are now, we are actually going to begin the process the town has received applications for architectural consideration, architectural firms. We will be moving through that selection process, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And then handing over to the town administrator, I believe,
Right.
selection to try to, to make a hire. And then we'll have sort of a team in place, and we'll begin to move forward in terms of this is what we need to do, this is what we need to, where we're gonna be, this is what we need to do. So that's probably gonna be at least a few weeks, if not a month or two, with that process, based on back and forth.
A month.
That
I mean,
might
I would
happen,
think
yeah,
a month,
yeah.
hopefully.
But, so that gets us into
Well, into May.
May or June, and we'll get started with moving forward.
Yes, which is very exciting. So the design phase is an important step, and one that we will continue to report on and keep you updated about as it moves forward. But there will be, I'm sure, a lot of input in terms of the design, the Public Building Commission, as you named. There may be others who are asked to
For input, get involved,
provide
sure.
input. I know the selectmen are interested
Yep.
in what we can do, but we are the representatives from the Council on Aging at this point, and bring a lot of background and experience to inform those choices, so I'm looking forward to it.
We have work to do.
We know what we need.
We have work to do.
Yeah.
We also want to thank everyone in the community who came out to town meeting.
Yes, yeah.
Whether you came out Monday night, whether you came out Tuesday night, whether you came out both. It's always good to have input, questions, discussion, debate. We certainly want to thank everyone who came out and made the point of coming out on Monday night to vote for this approval to move this project forward. So it's helpful to everyone in Scituate when you're participating. So it was a strong turnout. We're going to need it again.
Yes.
We're going to try to keep everyone informed as to what we're doing at our end. There's lots of other issues in town that need to be addressed. We've certainly had our fair share of winter storms that we're trying to recover from.
Right.
But again, want to thank everyone for coming out because it was a big help. So
Thank you. Thanks, JD.
we'll see you next week.